What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, so today's video, I wanted to take a moment to talk about something that I've seen a lot of people on both YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. I don't have Facebook anymore. I've been perma-banned from Facebook for one reason or another. But nonetheless, across social media, I've noticed a lot of people are suddenly talking about a character that many of them are pretending to remember that they actually don't. And that is Bastion.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
So when we got to episode 7 of X-Men 97, it was revealed that Bastion was in fact the mastermind behind everything that has been going on since the start of X-Men 97. And while I can definitely say I was probably one of the few people who actually called Bastion as being the villain, Carter, I'm sure you remember from episode 4, we got a tease. And I feel like this was one of those teases that wasn't on accident. There's a picture that pops up for the briefest of moments. Right there, right off rip.
I didn't catch that at first.
So, Carter, I'm sure you recognize the fit.
Yeah, I recognize that fit. Word for word, bar for bar, the exact same fit.
That is none other than
That's Bastion like a motherfucker.
That's Bastion.
Yeah, that's Bastion like a motherfucker.
A lot of people were clamoring for Cassandra Nova and a bunch of other characters that had nothing to do with Bastion. In the end, it ultimately was revealed that this was in fact the case. It is Bastion. We have seen him unalive, Henry Peter Gyrick. We have seen him introduce his prime Sentinels into the fold. And one of the things I thought was really funny is that when this happened, everybody and their grandma was out here making videos talking about how, oh yeah, Bastion. Oh, you guys don't know anything about Bastion, but I know who Bastion is. Well, I'm here to say the same thing, only I actually mean it. I was actively reading those comics back in the day. A lot of these people were not reading these comics back then. A lot of these people don't even really know who Bastion is, and they've been leaving out a lot of crucial information about Bastion that lets me know that they just read a wiki. I'm not gonna call names, but if you've watched my recent live stream of Nerds of Culture, and if you haven't, you can check it out up here, you know who I'm talking about. For those who are unfamiliar, Bastion was formed from the amalgam of a Nimrod Sentinel and a Master Mold Sentinel. This was something that actually took place back in Uncanny X-Men number 246, back in 1989. And if for whatever reason, if you're unfamiliar with what either of those things are, a Master Mold is a Sentinel that can create more Sentinels. And Nimrod is an advanced form of Sentinel from the far-flung future that was considered to be the ultimate in mutant hunting technology. It was capable of shape-shifting, capable of energy projections and blast that have been responsible for unaliving a great deal of mutants in the far-flung future. Not only that, Nimrod was also a Sentinel that could self-repair any damage whatsoever. Even when you thought you had destroyed it, it could bring itself back together, repair its parts, and become whole once again. The only way to destroy a Nimrod was to ensure that you destroyed every single atom of it. During the very next issue of Uncanny X-Men number 247, that very same amalgam of Master Mold and Nimrod was pushed through the amulet, the Siege Perilous. The Siege Perilous being a gateway to other realities in the multiverse. That said, knowing what the Siege Perilous was even back then, it was safe to say this was not a death sentence by any stretch of the imagination. Fast forward almost 7 years later, and suddenly we begin seeing a strange man with pink skin, who obviously was not a normal human, but hated mutants as if he was one. And while the full truth of what happened would be reiterated in Machine Man Bastion 98 number 1, the truth is we actually got the real story before any of this, going all the way back once again to that Uncanny X-Men number 247. In that issue, the Master Mold Nimrod hybrid tried to destroy itself because it realized it had become a mutant. Not a mutant in the same way that the X-Men are mutant, but a mutant in the sense that it is no longer like a normal Sentinel. And because of its programming, it tried to delete itself before it was sucked into the Siege Perilous. But where Machine Man Bastion 98 number 1 expounds upon this is that we learn what happened to those pieces. As the destroyed pieces of this Master Mold Nimrod hybrid passed through the Siege Perilous, a chain reaction was caused, and the pieces of the Master Mold Nimrod amalgam reforged themselves into one singular entity, an amnesiac mutant hunting man. He was taken in by a human woman, Rose Gilberti, who took pity on him in his state of confusion and adopted him as a son, and he began living as a human named Simon Gilberti and began living a relatively normal human life. He had love, he had family, he had everything that a human being could possibly want, and yet he was still missing something. His programming as a Nimrod and Master Mold was still there, even if it was only dormant. And no differently than how humans, even in the real world, can become indoctrinated and radicalized by the news media they consume that is churning out a narrative that speaks to the darkest parts of their psyche, so too did Bastion. Hearing news day and night about mutants, constant headlines playing up how dangerous mutants are to humankind, this awoke the Sentinel programming in his mind and led him to join the Friends of Humanity. He would even later go on to leak plans of more advanced Sentinels to Sabretooth's son, Graydon Creed, who at the time was running for president. He rubbed shoulders with all the bigwigs in government military contracts, and eventually he'd rebrand himself as Bastion, as in the last bastion of hope for humankind. And while in his own mind he is the last bastion of hope for humanity against mutants, he would also become their end as well, or at least their potential end, because no differently than Master Mold before him, he too knew that humans are the cause for mutation, so they must be eliminated as well. And you can see a lot of this kind of factoring in over the course of Operation Zero Tolerance, and also in some things we learned later in Machine Man Bastion 98. The truth is that he introduced a new and deadlier version of Sentinels to the Marvel Comics universe known as Prime Sentinels. Sentinels that were based on nanomachine technology. This was the all-new Sentinel program introduced through Operation Zero Tolerance, and these new Prime Sentinels were a whole problem for the X-Men because, for one, they could be hidden inside of humans, creating sleeper Sentinel agents, activating whenever they were in the presence of an active mutant X gene, and in some cases, even one that wasn't quite active yet. The X-Men, for the first time, had to truly fear humans, not because of their bigotry, but because they could potentially be a Sentinel. These Prime Sentinels were so powerful that not only were their energy blasts deadly to mutants, but also they could shift their size to be as small as a normal human or to be as large as a standard Sentinel. Not only that, they had access to Xavier's files, meaning they had even more updated knowledge of the current crop of X-Men, as well as other mutants that Xavier had cataloged up to that point. And these Prime Sentinels come from a very dark place. Bastion used his resources and newfound fortune thanks to accruing so many government contracts. Bastion would open a clinic whose secret function was not to help disabled people, but to use them as test subjects to become the first Prime Sentinels, giving them false hopes of fixing their sight, giving them full usage of their legs and arms back, promising to cure the chronic pain that they had been dealing with for most of, if not all of their life, promising to make them whole, and in the end, the only thing he actually promised to make them was a whole mutant hunting Prime Sentinel. This would ultimately be his downfall though, because eventually, because of this, as well as President Kelly realizing that Bastion's war against mutants was spilling into the human sector and also using humans to fight mutants in such a way, this ultimately led to President Kelly moving to have S.H.I.E.L.D. shut down Operation Zero Tolerance. This would ultimately lead to Bastion getting bounced around a bit. He would become a captive of S.H.I.E.L.D. and eventually he would become a captive of Mainspring. And while Bastion would seemingly be destroyed by both Cable and Machine Man in that Machine Man Bastion 98 one-shot that I mentioned earlier, we would later see him in issues of Astonishing X-Men as well as Warlock. And over the course of his time across those series, we would see him introduced to the techno-organic virus, the very same virus that's associated with the Phalanx. After being introduced to this, his power would grow exponentially. As a Nimrod Master Mold hybrid, you would imagine he was already superhuman before that. This is how he was able to go toe-to-toe with characters who were infinitely stronger and more powerful than him during his initial X-Men run. And while he never exhibited any outward abilities that would have you believe that he was as powerful as he truly was, the signs were always there, and we knew he had the ability to control Sentinels just on voice command alone, and he could even replicate the voices of others. But generally speaking, if he wanted to exert power, he had to use crude firearms, no matter how technologically advanced compared to a Sentinel. Once he was introduced to the techno-organic virus, he gained a lot of the abilities you would associate with the Phalanx, the ability to assimilate other organic life forms, even dead ones, and make them his slave. He also gained the ability to control other machines and technology, and because of the techno-organic virus running roughshod through him, this gave him a more cybernetic morphology, which allowed him to reshape his body no differently than a Technarch like Warlock could. Also able to upgrade and downgrade his body as he needed and create new weapons and armaments for himself on the fly. Not only that, once his head was reintroduced to an actual Nimrod frame, he gained the self-repairing abilities and energy projection prowess of a Nimrod. Now, if everything I just said makes him sound like he's probably one of the most deadly X-Men villains that has ever been slept on, you'd be right. And to be fair, while Bastion is no longer among the living today, he was unalived in X-Men Blue number 28. In 2018, during that X-Men Blue run, we learned just how dangerous a guy like Bastion can truly be. We discovered in that X-Men Blue series that in the wake of story arcs like E is for Extinction and House of M, where the mutant population had been drastically brought down from millions to thousands to literally just hundreds and roughly around 200 mutants at the time, this led to Bastion's programming changing. He no longer had an enemy to fight. And instead of trying to destroy all mutants, Bastion decided he wanted to help mutants rebuild their population numbers to their pre-Genosha Massacre numbers, upwards of 17 million mutants. Now, you're thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, isn't Bastion a bad guy? Why did he want to save mutant kind? Well, it wasn't because he wanted to save them. It was because he wanted to rebuild their numbers so that he could resume his core programming of destroying all mutants. Now, all that said, Bastion in X-Men 97 might be a whole other monster altogether. We already know that at the very least, he is a Nimrod. Whether he has that master mold part of himself built in is another story altogether. How they'll tackle that is up to anyone's guess. But I'm gonna go on a limb and say, just based on some things that Bo DeMaio has recently put out on Twitter, saying that before this upcoming 8th episode of X-Men 97, that people may want to go back and watch One Man's Worth Part 1 and 2. And for those who are not familiar, that is a set of episodes where a Nimrod does show up and is destroyed. So maybe some piece of that Nimrod might have survived and is still out there somewhere. Maybe that Nimrod got a hold of a Master Mold. As we know, seen Master Mold pop up more than once or twice in the X-Men animated series across the original OG 90 series and X-Men 97. Bo has also gone on to say that we've actually seen Bastion pop up in more episodes than people might have thought. That he's literally been in every episode except episodes 3 and 6. And I, for one, pointed out one particular instance where Bastion showed up in episode 4. So yeah, he has definitely been around. And as I've actually gone back and watched, I have seen where he has shown up, what Bo is actually talking about here. We see him very briefly in the first episode, and this actually has been confirmed by Bo DeMaio, that the pair of hands we see drawing what appears to be the X-Mansion on fire when Jean is trying to read Gyric's mind, that is, in fact, Bastion's hands. And as a matter of fact, this confirms that we're going to get a different origin for Bastion, and that maybe the version of him in this doesn't start out as an adult man after the Nimrod Master Mold hybrid turns into a human, but maybe instead of being a full adult man, he starts out as a child. We also see him in episode 2 of X-Men 97 in a war room sitting right next to Val Cooper. And as I have noted on multiple occasions since episode 4 of X-Men 97, we see him hugged up with Forge in a picture from when Forge was still in the military. And while some people probably will dispute this, but this has actually been confirmed as well, Bastion is at the Hellfire Gala on Genosha before the Wild Sentinels attack. You literally see him in a blink and you'll miss it pass by, where you can only really see the very top of his head and his eyes. And I think it's pretty cool that Bastion is being used. I think Bastion is a way more interesting character than Cassandra Nova could ever hope to be, just based on the pure ridiculousness of his origin and who he could have become after becoming human and what he ultimately became. Not to mention, he is on brand for X-Men 97, considering that his first appearance was in X-Men Volume 2, number 52 in 1996. Cassandra Nova didn't show up in Marvel Comics until about roughly 2000, 2001. So yeah, this guy makes way more sense to be a part of X-Men 97 than Cassandra Nova could ever hope to be. You guessed it, obligatory channel outro time. If you're not subscribed to the channel, consider doing so. Clicking that subscribe button and tapping that notification bell ensures that you get more videos just like this one, and you don't miss any of my other content that I drop throughout the week, plus my live streams every Thursday and Saturday. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure you click that like button, keep it plus ultra, and sound off in the comments.